philosophy of mind is huge. It's super important for lots of different reasons, for Christian philosophy, Christian apologetics, for understanding personhood. In your mind, can you flesh that out for us? Like, why is it important for those disciplines?
Yeah, I think it's huge. And it's bizarre because I think I can count on one hand the number of Christian philosophers working in philosophy of mind.
Yeah.
And, 3 or 4 of the, 3 of them are retiring. So there's if I can encourage people, go to philosophy of mind. I think it touches on everything. So like, I think I said my overall projects in philosophy are centered on this sort of foundation of phenomenal consciousness.
Yeah.
And so this is a very sort of phenomenological approach to philosophy in the world. And so I think that consciousness is just one of the most, if not the most intrinsically fascinating feature of reality. It's also, it's the way that Chalmers and others introduce it, they say it's peculiar because it's the one thing that we're all intimately familiar with, yet it's deeply mysterious.
Mm-hmm.
Mysterious. And it's sort of, one of the great mysteries right now that people are largely convinced we're nowhere near solving under a particular guise, under a particular research program. So I think it's intrinsically interesting. I think it's culturally relevant. And in particular, I think that the debates going on in transhumanism and artificial intelligence, and then, the sort of, what I call like the future magic view of neuroscience, that the idea that, neuroscience is going to solve all of our psychological problems. Those 3 issues are central to what's going on and will become even more important as culture moves forward, especially with artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
And so understanding so for example, like if my dissertation or now this book that I'm writing on is right, there's just we will never have computers or anything that are conscious like that.
Yes.
Right. So that's important for 2 reasons. One, if ethical knowledge requires, like most people think, having emotions or feelings, and computers can't have emotions or feelings, then it seems like they're not going to be able to have moral knowledge. And if they can't have moral knowledge, then we ought not trust them with many things.
Yes.
Right? And but at the same time, if they could be conscious, then we face the ethical dilemma of turning a computer off is akin to killing a person.
Right.
So that's a really key
it's
issue.
So good. There's so many trails I don't want to go down all of them, but I think of like iRobot, where Will Smith has this prejudice against robots because spoilers, it's been out for so long, but he has a prejudice against robots because one saved him instead of this child, because it did this inward, calculation and determined he is more valuable. And in that situation, it was actually representing, I would say, the ethical calculations of its operator, of whoever programmed it.
Right.
So it wasn't its own, even in that case, right?
Yeah, and that's exactly why places like Google have hired philosophers. So self-driving cars, this is a real ethical dilemma. You have to program into that some way of deciphering out who it's going to hit if it has to hit someone.
Yeah,
and that's a huge dilemma. So these issues about consciousness and what constitutes what the nature of a person is ought to guide and curtail the sorts of technology that we should develop. Right. So, in akin to, many people thinking that we just shouldn't have invented the atom bomb because that's way too much power for us to have. You might think that, artificial intelligence is the sort of thing that we need to be careful with. I think artificial intelligence is going to be already is extremely helpful with all sorts of things.
Yeah.
And there's an important distinction to be made. Usually when people talk about artificial intelligence, they usually think about machines that are conscious.
Right.
And that's only one form of artificial intelligence. We're not anywhere close to having that.
Yeah.
When people talk about artificial intelligence now, it's just machines that are dark on the inside.
Right. And so here's a question that I've been wanting to ask a philosopher of mine. In the maybe neuroscience, but in like the computer science world, they talk about AGI.
Right.
And in the philosophical world, I have read Searle. I really like his arguments, even though
Yeah.
his personal life is kind of messed up. But he talks about strong AI and weak AI.
Right.
Is AGI, is that like correlated? Is that strong AI? Are those the same things? Do you?
Yeah. So AGI, they're very, very close. So artificial general intelligence is going to be the kinds of AI that are conscious,
Mhm.
right? And then you would have so that's what AGI is. It's the
Yeah.
particular kind of artificial intelligence that are in science fiction.
Right.
And like I said, we don't have anything close to that right now.
Yeah.
So yeah, it would be close to strong. In the Husserl's piece, I'm sorry, in Searle's piece, he's a little bit more after understanding, but yeah, that's a really good correlation there.
Okay. Yeah, that's something I've been thinking about a lot, and I love that. I love the cultural or the social, imaginary is kind of taken by this obfuscation on artificial intelligence, right? People
Yeah,
look, there's this robot lady, and she's going on talk shows, and she's been granted human rights by Iran or whoever,
yeah,
and all the computer scientists kind of laughing behind the scenes, like, yeah, it's not really AGI, but and all the philosophers
yeah.
like, no, that's not even
Right.
close at all, dude. And if it is, then you turned her off. Like, what are you
Yeah,
doing? That's
yeah.
morally egregious.
Right, right. So there are deep problems there. I think that philosophy of mind also is important for areas in ethics in general and
Mhm.
epistemology. So for example, corporations can be held accountable, held morally accountable and sanctioned accordingly. But if my arguments are right about the unity of consciousness, anything with the particular kind of parts that we'll explain in a minute can't be conscious. So a
Yeah.
corporation couldn't be a conscious entity,
Yeah.
and it couldn't have moral properties to be held accountable. What needs to be held accountable then are the people that constitute the corporation at a
Yeah.
particular level. So this would mean, so I was talking with a friend, Brandon Paradise, yesterday. He's a law professor at Rutgers, and we were talking about this. And um, it's a way that lawyers are going to be really apprehensive about this, because it makes it the case that major executives cannot hide behind companies
Yeah.
in order to enact things that are radically morally questionable.
Yeah.
So that then I think the big thing that I'm interested in right now is applying philosophy of mind to the philosophy of religion, which there's not been done much work at all. I think you've got the cognitive science of religion that
Mhm.
would be important. There's been very few people, if any, that have applied philosophy of mind to the cognitive sciences of religion. In that paper that you read on Alistair McGrath, I tried to
Yeah.
do that. I think there's a lot of work to be done in natural theology that hasn't been done. One of the projects that I have for next year is a consciousness first project on natural theology,
Mm.
where I try to apply specific methodology in what I'm calling analytic phenomenology, and issues in consciousness to issues in debates in natural theology. So, for example, the design argument. So there's a recently published paper where Philip Goff argues that the universe could design itself.
Mm.
It has a particular kind of cosmopsychist consciousness. And then you've got the arguments from consciousness, like Moreland and Swinburne and Adams and others have given. But I think there's other ways that you can apply it, particularly. So I have stuff on divine hiddenness that I think you can apply,
Oof.
understanding of what consciousness is, what perception is, and integrate that with certain psychological evidence, datum, to help us understand what's actually how to frame the issue of divine hiddenness in a new way.
Man, that sounds so interesting. That sounds so helpful. Yeah, there's the psychology at play. If it's directed a certain way, wouldn't recognize. I don't want to scoop or anything like that, but that sounds
No, no,
super
no.
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and then it would impact issues in epistemology. People are really, really interested in social epistemology right now.
Yeah, big time.
But if my arguments are correct, then social groups cannot have epistemic properties because something that epistemic properties are largely going to be properties that correlate with or require consciousness, and groups of people can't be conscious.
That's
If
so interesting.
my argument is correct, if my argument is correct.
Right. That's so interesting because these are deep, like deep aspects of a subset of philosophy in the philosophy of mind, which is huge. But it has these practical applications in social theory and what's going on today. It has aspects in law. I think both that law argument of the CEO not being able to hide behind his corporation and different sociological groups not being conscious. It sounds like Ned Block's Chinese nation argument. Again, right? Together they don't. There's no consciousness that emerges out of putting these people in this certain relation or anything like that. So interesting.
Right. And there's in philosophy of religion too. There's projects. Marilyn McCord Adams ends her famous paper on horrendous evils and the goodness of God by saying, look, there's this account that I've given about God being able to share in the mental states of Christ, or God being able to share in the mental states of ours, that is totally unclear and really needs to be fleshed out by philosophy of mind. And there are other issues too in Alston's work on the presence of the spirit and other sort of projects in the philosophy of mind. So that there's just a huge number of issues that are just waiting to be worked on, I think.
Yeah.